Hello guys, how we doing? Hope we're all doing fantastically well. Hope we're all resonating. This is Red Pill Phil, speaking to you from a location just outside of Manchester. I'm doing this clip a little bit differently. You've got an audio of me sat in one location, and you've got the visual of me walking round a municipal park called Phillips Park, which dates back to 1846, one of the largest parks apparently in Greater Manchester. This historic park is Grade 2 listed, and many of its original features remain to this day, apparently, including a carriage drive, serpentine paths, amphitheatre and head gardener's house. The park has undergone significant refurbishment and today is a key green space within the Medlock River Valley corridor. Well, considering it's surrounded by basically an industrial area, you've got many Manchester districts that surround this. You're talking Beswick, which used to be classed as Greymare Lane. You're talking Newton Heath. You're talking Moston, Miles Platting, which I originated from, Ancoats, Collyhurst, Clayton. You've got all these regions that are literally close in proximity to this park. It's right within an industrial area, and it has got a lot of historical value. I used to play there as a kid. The river that I'm walking along that you'll see footage, I as a kid I attempted to jump across from one bank to the other, didn't make it, and then ended up being whisked away. As you can see, it's quite fast travelling, so I ended up being whisked away, and if it wasn't for a lot of my friends, who knows where I would have ended up. So that is one of my memories of this park. But I decided just to have a walk round, just to have a different location and give people something to look at other than my ugly boat race, really. But that said, thank you all for taking the time out to watch this video. Right, I've had from my last video that I reported, which was a video reporting on professors, mainly American, and authors as well, that had a rhetoric that was ultimately anti-white, demonistic in its value, and totally playing into the race baiting and the whole culture that is starting to manifest, let's say, professing the white guilt upon the white population, and the emergence of extremism, would you say, that the white man is about to rise, which is, to me, a fallacy. I live amongst many white people, many human beings, and we all are trying to live our lives. But you get professors, you get media that talk in a certain way, that want to steer you in a certain way, that no, this is what it's all about. So that's what that video was all about, that clip. Basically saying that they're out of order for saying what they're saying, in the way that they're saying, and they should know better, being as at least two of the quotes were coming from black people, which should know from in times previous, times that have shown where there has been no tolerance, that you would think that they would have a bit more of a humble view on the overall view of life. But no, other than that, we will profess a view of the best way to take this move forward is to profess that the white people are to blame for everything. So basically that's what the video was regarding, and how these people are in a position of teaching where they're in a position where they're learning people, and they should be doing it in a more responsible way. And if you're going to teach people, you teach people in a fair manner, whether they be young adults or whether they be small children. You've got to give them the information in a fair and transparent nature and let them make their own mind up. Don't try and steer their way of thinking. Allow them to use their brains. Kids being kids, they've got brains like sponges, which is a saying that's often used in regards to kids. They take in lots of information, and as with us all, there is some information that's kind of put to the back drawer, but then later brought out. So you've got to make sure that your information that you're inputting to everybody is of a fair nature, and then they can objectively look at life and make their own true decisions, rather than being misinformed and giving decisions that will steer them along an inevitable path that makes it quite difficult for them to see truth in it all, because they're too busy being brainwashed in a certain way. And that's what my videos are all about, just trying to lay it out and trying to talk about things that our media, our politicians won't really want to discuss, because they want to portray our lives in a certain way. So, having said that, there was this lovely person that's got in touch with me via my last video and basically said, Phil, you would not believe, going off your last video, staying on thought of that last video that you uploaded, that what my kids, or at least one child, is being taught in schools. Now, me being a father of two daughters, one is college, you could say, and one who is in still what you would class as a primary school. So this is very much relevant to me. Now, this lady has managed to get the facts over to me one way or the other, and I do feel that it's quite disturbing when you actually look over what this child is being taught, and probably many other children across England, across the north, you know, no matter where you are in the country, it does become apparent that there does seem to be some kind of agenda in the way that they're teaching the children on aspects that should be transparent. So no doubt while this video is running, I'm going to try and put up the original photos and original comments of what, one, this lady has said to me, and two, what work that this child has had to do in the class. Okay, so I've managed to rewrite it down just for my own clarity, and so I've got it right here in front of me. The piece of paper that was written by a child, presumably in school, and presumably copied from, no doubt, the blackboard or the whiteboard nowadays. Now you've got to be politically correct, so we'll just call it a board, shall we? Eh? And this is how crazy it's getting. But no doubt this was copied from original text that was written by the teacher or by the assistant teacher or whoever was actually commencing that lesson at that time, or lessons. Okay, now this was dated Wednesday the 6th of December 2017, and the head title is Extremism. Okay, so it's got extremism, holding the extreme political views or religious views. Okay, and then it's got terrorism as another byheading, the unofficial or unauthorized use of violence. And now there'll be a couple of sentences that kind of stop abruptly in the way that I read them. It's just because the photo that I gained from this person, from this lovely lady, regarding this matter, it doesn't show, the photo doesn't show the whole complete sentence. So I guess that's probably not the best way of moving forward, but 9/10 of the information is actually there. So it's not that I'm literally filling in the gaps. There's literally one or two words that may be missing. So terrorism, the unofficial or unauthorized use of violence, and fill the blanks. Okay, so it's got the next one down, extremists, and then it's got in brackets groups. Okay, so this is where it, for me, gets quite interesting. Okay, now, the way the list has been drawn, I can only surmise from the top to the bottom, the top should be the most important in terms of extremists, and the bottom should be the least important in terms of extremists, because you're trying to get this message over to children. So there's no point in putting something that is not relevant at the top and then something that is vastly important at the bottom. That is my train of thought. And if I was a teacher conducting this teaching lesson, then that's how I would put it out. I'd put out at the top what is most important, and then being almost what you would class as chronological, kind of running down to the less important as it runs down. So it goes to extremist, in brackets groups. Okay, top of the list. So the thing that is most important for this child to understand in terms of extremist is the EDL, the English Defence League. Okay. Then you've got the next one down, which is Britain First. You've got the KKK, Ku Klux Klan. I don't see too many of them running around where I live, running around the streets of Manchester. I'm sure there are affiliated organisations within England. I'm not that naive to suggest that they're not, but to suggest that they're third in line, as in the most extreme groups in England, I would disagree. Number 4, you've got the Nazi Party. Same again. I'm sure there are people that do feel that way, and I'm sure with the way that the news is being portrayed, you will have this party and the 3 parties I've just mentioned above it that will be emboldened, that will get strengthened by numbers, because you've got an establishment that's professing that these guys are the major problem in the world today, okay, in terms of extremist groups. So that's going to make any individual think, well, what's the point in me addressing my concerns as an English patriot human being on this planet, in this country, when all that is going to happen, I'm going to be categorised as a person of an extreme opinion. So then you are going to, by very nature, going to lean to someone who is talking of the rhetoric that you want to hear, which, same again, comes under the EDL, Britain First, KKK. So it's becoming extremist to think about your country and think about all the nefarious stuff that's going on in terms of radical Islam, in terms of the face of your country changing, okay? As soon as you mention that, you become a racist, you become an extremist. So you've now joined the illustrious group, okay? Now, the last one in this bank of 5 is ISIS. Now, same again, going back to the beginning. Does ISIS deserve to be at the bottom? Now, I would say with all the attacks that have transpired through England, throughout Europe, over the past, 20 years, with all the different attacks when it comes to grooming gangs, acid attacks, stabbings, we've had beheadings on the streets of England. We've had a numerous amount of incidents happen under the name of ISIS and ISIS-affiliated groups and ISIS-affiliated mentality, you might say. So for me, if I was to use an analogy in terms of if this was a race, okay, 100-meter race, and you had these 5 groups all in the starter blocks, okay, all ready, waiting for the pistol to go to start the race. Okay, now in terms of attacks, in terms of ideology, in terms of censorship towards one side, in terms of nefarious acts generally that has gone on and transpired in this country in the last 20 years. Now, if this was a race and the starter pistol had gone off and these 5 groups, bearing in mind of all the attacks that has transpired and the ideologies that contain within, which would you say that would be first to the tape at the end of the finish line in terms of everything that has gone on in this country? Now, EDL, okay, would you say Britain's first? Would you say Ku Klux Klan? Would you say the Nazi Party? Now, all 4 of them are steering towards the same kind of ideology where what this paper is trying to say is that these 4 groups, they're all just as extreme as ISIS, and according to this paper, that all the attacks that have transpired in England over the past 20 years, these guys are just as much up there as anybody else. Now, I would find that farcical to think that, if I'm going to be totally honest, in terms of where ISIS has come from, the ideology, the lunacy, migrancy flow that we've got coming in, the lack of people being vetted, the ideology that seems to be creeping in within a small percentage of these migrants that are coming in, the rapes that transpire, the grooming gangs that transpire, the stabbings, okay, the acid attacks, the general on the street people being abused because of their beliefs, whether you be Christian or whether you be agnostic, just because you are not a Muslim. Okay, so if we was to collate all them figures together, who would be first, second, third, fourth, fifth? Now, the gold medal, for me, has got to go to ISIS, which we all know. Okay? Now, we can run through the line of who should be second, third, but it's almost, I wouldn't say irrelevant, because of course you have got optics in all of them other groups that I don't subscribe to, ideologies within the groups, all of them, some more degree than others, but to be fair, most of them I don't agree with and I don't align with, okay? But this paper is trying to say that right-wing extremism is just as important and just as much a threat to this country as ISIS. Now, what they're trying to do there, they're trying to tar everybody with the same brush, in a sense that I will be attending marches over the next following months. Now, I know that the marches that I am subscribing to, the marches that I endorse, don't have any of these views. But yet, you will probably go to these locations on the day of the march, and I will probably find that there will be someone local to that march in proximity that will say, oh, a week earlier there was a local newspaper that was calling this march a far-right march. So what they're trying to do, they're trying to get your kids into thinking that the EDL, Britain First, KKK, Nazi Party are all far-right, which, you could argue to some degree. Not to say that I agree with any of them said groups at all, because I don't. But what they're trying to do, because these people are feeling a concern that's not being adhered, not being listened to by the bigger population and the establishment, the establishment are turning round now and making you, the people who follow all these groups, just as much a part of the problem as you've got ISIS, which is insulting to anyone who's got a brain in their head, and is probably going to embolden more people to join these groups. Because if you've got people that have got concerns, average people, and they feel they can't turn to any establishment, they can't turn to a paper and say, well, listen, this has just happened on the street, because as soon as you mention it in a certain context, you are deemed as far right. So then you join the first four groups, which makes you more of a threat than ISIS. We've got severe problems. We've got our young children that are going to grow up. They're not, this, to a degree, this teaching, this learning will all be what you would regard for me as subliminal. So this pupil in question has written this down, but that's fine. It's not to say that he's going to go home or she's going to go home and think, right, the top tier is EDL, Britain's First, KKK, Nazi Party, ISIS. No. What they're going to do, which anyone would do, it's going to be subliminal. So you're going to put certain words, pack it away in the drawer. Okay? So as soon as certain words are brought out in stories, Tommy Robinson, Make Britain First, the usual parties that are talking about genuine concerns that are legitimate, the drawer is going to be pulled out and the word association is going to come into play, i.e., extremist, i.e., far right, i.e., Nazis. They're using it all. EDL, Britain First, KKK, Nazi Party. All that before ISIS, when we know how many attacks has transpired. Okay? So, just food for thought there. I can understand why this lady got in touch with me. Totally fuming. I can totally see why that's happened. This list goes on. Why do people hold extremist views? And then it's got a question mark. Unwillingness to compromise. Okay, so these guys are unwilling to compromise. These guys, no doubt, some of them will have nefarious views. But some of them, I will say, and all of them, will be joining that crew, whether it be EDL, Britain's First, KKK, or the Nazi Party. I'm not backing any of them up, because none of them I subscribe to. But it's nothing to do with unwillingness to compromise. You will have some that will be there because they do feel that they want predominantly a white country. And there will be a grain of that flowing through each one of these organisations. I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to be naive. But at the same time, the majority of people who join these groups, they're only joining them because the establishment is putting the fingers up to them. And as soon as they've got worries and concerns that they talk about certain scenarios, they're banned off Facebook, they're getting demonised on Twitter, they're getting called extremism here, they're getting called racism there, they're getting called Nazi. So it's going to make them want to join that. So what's the point in talking about a compromise when the compromise, they're already compromising because they're trying to talk about things. But they're trying to talk about things, however extreme they are, and however more violent they're probably getting, they are trying to talk about things, and they have been for several years. But they're not being met at that compromise cul-de-sac, let's say. The only compromise is if you go along these views, you are deemed as a Nazi. You are deemed as white supremacist, which is disingenuous, which is only going to embolden more people, okay? Now, it also says, certain they are right. It's not a case of certain they are right. In a lot of these cases, there'll be a lot of facts that they can pull up to say why they've got the feelings that they've got. Okay? So to be shouted down is not really the way to go. You should listen to people. There'll be a lot of facts and figures I've looked up myself. A lot of facts and figures that justify why these guys feel that there's a problem within Western society, within their own society, within England. Okay, so same again. Who's right and who's wrong here? We all should be sat at a table talking about it instead of going, no, well, you're just wrong, you're just a Nazi. But then have the cheek to put ISIS at the bottom of that list in terms of the threats that your child is going through. ISIS is the least that you've got to worry about, which is a very silly statement to make, but this is what your kids are learning, okay? And they're going to put that in the drawer. The ISIS at the bottom, EDL, Britain First, KKK, Nazi Party all at the top. Okay, this list goes on. Never had been exposed to an alternative. Well, I would disagree with that also. There's been lots of alternatives. But same again, the alternative seems to be castigated. There's no alternative. There seems to be just a left-wing way of looking at things. And unless you allow everything that is transpiring, then you're deemed as one of these parties, or you may as well be. I've been called EDL, and I don't, I've never gone to an EDL meeting and never subscribed to an EDL meeting. I will never go to an EDL march. I will never go to a Britain's First march. I've never subscribed to them, But I appreciate what some of the talking points that they're bringing up. Not all of them. And I don't appreciate the way the optics look in any of them parties either. Or the KKK or the Nazi Party. But there will be a degree of talking points that will go, well, I can appreciate what they're saying there. Just because I am of a certain colour, it doesn't mean that I can't look at what they are talking about, even if it's a small percentage of what I truly believe in and what we can kind of come together and say, all right, well, we can agree on that point, The colour is irrelevant. It's the talking points. So you've got to kind of see it from that point of view. Anyone with an opposing view can be expendable. So they're basically saying that anyone who doesn't agree with them, now you could go either side. That's what they're trying to say EDL, Britain's First, KKK, the Nazi Party are saying. Anyone who opposes with our views is expendable. But you could say that with the left. The left have that mentality. Anyone who has got their view is okay. Anyone who is not of their view is expendable, so they will do what they can. They will out them, they will be violent towards them, they will dox them, they will treat them in a manner that you would regard as unwarranted, unjustified, okay? And that's what these guys do, okay? They're also saying within this piece of paper that anyone who's got these views of extremism, bearing in mind, look at the list, ISIS at the bottom, they're vulnerable, okay? So these are vulnerable people that have decided to join EDL, Britain's First, KKK. Now, I would disagree with that. I wouldn't class them as vulnerable people. I would class them as people who have had enough. The system doesn't seem to be listening to them. And they've found somebody who is talking in some ways, to some degree, their language. Whether everyone in these parties fully agree with the edicts, the mandates, the manifestos of these parties, that is another matter. But they have got someone who is talking in a way that they can relate to. Whereas you've got our establishment that are totally blocking this conversation and totally turning it, in a sense that they're trying to teach your kids that extremism is more coming from the white population within England rather than ISIS. Now, ISIS doesn't mean to say black population, doesn't mean to say brown population. Let's just say a Middle Eastern ideology, if we're going to be totally correct on it. Because you can get white people that join ISIS. You can get black people that join ISIS. But it's ISIS itself, Islamic State. And it also says at the bottom here of this piece of paper, that this child has had to write down. Their family have raised them to think. Now, same again, it stops. So the mind boggles what the end of that sentence. Now, I can imagine the lady in question that sent me this clip, knowing that this person is a subber of mine, has watched several videos of mine, I do believe, and hopefully resonates with the truth, or more degrees of the truth that I'm trying to put out. Now, when this lady has got a son that goes to school, and or maybe a daughter that has to write down this on a piece of paper, and then it's put their family have raised them to think. Now, I can only assume raised them to think that basically they're all wrong-uns, and it shouldn't be. Now, when it comes to ISIS and the Nazi Party, yeah, no need to go too far. KKK, yeah, get that. Britain's first. We can agree with all of that because they all, in one way or another, going too far in a way that is comfortable for me. Now, whether you agree with that, that's another matter. But in terms of this lady thinking this, she would obviously be incensed with the fact that they're trying to portray that this lady, by her sheer views, is running 180 degrees against the grain with what has been written down here. So her child, by that day's learning, or hours learning, could come home and by very nature think that their own mother is an extremist by nature. Now, not to say that this lady is supporter of EDL, Britain First, KKK, the Nazi Party. I'm not saying that at all. But what these guys are trying to do within this paper, they are trying to tie everyone with the same brush as ISIS. So if you've got a problem with what is going on in this country at this moment in time, you are just as bad as ISIS. In fact, according to the list, you are worse than ISIS. So that's my 10 cents. I don't think that this should be right in any sense. And I do believe that people are seeing through it, and it just seems to be so disappointing that our children are being brainwashed in this manner to hit them with a low blow when they're still not really knowing the full extent of what's going on, because kids are kids. So you, instead of totally informing them and giving them nothing but, you know, an objective view of everything that's transpiring, no, we're going to lean it towards a certain way. So I find that quite distasteful, really. I thank this lady for sending all this material to me. I'd like to thank everyone that's been listening. Hopefully it's been useful for you. There's a big march commencing, and it's not a far-right extremism march. It is a normal common sense march that is happening in Newcastle, which is going to be by veterans, and it's called the Veterans Against Terrorism. It's going to be happening in Newcastle on the 17th of February, which I can't wait for to get out on the road. Hopefully the numbers are going to be really good. And we'll wait and see, I guess. But this is just a video just to show how manipulative and how deceiving that our school system is, trying to brainwash young children of how the current problems that are going on, how basically the extremists have been divvied up. Not just ISIS, no, we're talking normal populated folks of this country now that happen to be white, that could be mixed race, could be black. Anyone who regards what is going on in this country and who joins an affiliated group, albeit whether the optics are bad, albeit whether the group has got any strength going forward, whether this group is being managed well, it's by the by. Actions speak louder than words, and there's been far more actions when it comes to ISIS and ISIS-affiliated attacks in this country than any of the other said organisations. So I'm going to leave it at that. So this is Red Pill Phil. Hope you liked and resonated. Like and subscribe, all that kind of stuff, guys. You take care. Hope you are all looking after yourselves, and hopefully get to see you down there in Newcastle on the 17th of February. So this is Red Pill Phil. You take care. God bless you all. Even.